Welcome back to From the Belly. I'm Doug Wheeler. I welcome you to this podcast. If you're a first-time listener, we welcome you. By the way, I need to get better at doing promotions. So this would be a commercial piece for my coaching practice, which I do have some vacancies for. You can find me at dougasguide.com, dougasguide.com. And I think you'll learn the things that you need to learn about how to reach out to me and get something rolling in that direction. Back to the podcast. Today, I have two guests. Dr. Carolyn Baker is a former psychotherapist and professor of psychology and history. Carolyn currently offers life and leadership coaching, as well as spiritual counseling for people who want to live more resiliently in the present as they prepare for the future. I have her book, Savage Grace. That's how I came to know Carolyn and reached out to her from that place. And then we talk in the most recent episode, that was 2 weeks ago. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts. Her book, Confronting Christofascism. And Frank Schaefer wrote the foreword to that. I've had Frank on From the Belly years back. You can find that in the archive. Meg Wheatley. Meg Wheatley began caring about the world's peoples in 1966 as a Peace Corps volunteer in post-war Korea in many different roles: speaker, teacher, consultant, advisor, formal leader. Meg acts from the unshakable conviction that leaders must learn how to invoke people's inherent generosity, creativity, and need for community. As this world tears us apart, sane leadership on behalf of the human spirit is the only way forward. We start the episode with what's going on currently, and we launch from there. With no further ado, I hope you enjoy the conversation today. I hope you continue to listen in, and please share it with the people in your tribe, and we'll just continue to grow this tribe of resistance. So thank you very much, and I'm grateful for you. Welcome all you listeners to From the Belly. This is a roundtable episode, which if you've listened to us in the past, that means that I have more than one guest. So a little bit of table setting. It was about 3 weeks ago that Carolyn Baker, who is at the round table today, we did. To me, the word vibrant is the word that I want to pick up. It was vibrant to be with Carolyn, and we're about 20 minutes in to the podcast, and she said, after quoting somebody's work, she said, "You've got to talk to Meg Wheatley." And I said, well, how about if we just agree right now in real time that I'll reach out to Meg and we'll make this happen. She's like, that's great. And within a week, Meg said yes.
It was done.
So Meg is at the table as well. Meg, welcome. Carolyn, welcome.
So happy to be here.
So great to be here. Yes.
Fantastic. We've already covered your bios. I've noticed in doing these that when somebody reads a person's bio and the guest is sitting there listening, I always have a sense that the guest is like, okay, that's enough.
Right.
Let's get into it.
Exactly.
So we've already covered that. So here's what I woke up to this morning. What I woke up to this morning is that I thought for us to get centered together at the table was to invite another voice just for a moment. And so I don't know if you know the Reverend Philip Newell, who's a Celtic spiritual scholar and whatever. I want to read a little piece of his, and I want to invite Philip to the table.
Thank you.
And I think it'll help us get centered. And then we have some things to cover today. I would have liked to have blocked out about 6 hours today because I got a lot of people. Truly, I got a lot of people, and I was sharing this, Meg, with Carolyn. A lot of people waking up every morning, and maybe this morning after yesterday and the day before, a lot of fear.
Well, I want to talk about that.
We will, Meg. And as one person said, I'm not a scared person by nature. And then the person broke into tears and just said, I'm really, really afraid.
Yes, it's valid. It's valid.
Absolutely.
It's valid. I said, you're a conduit for what's happening. That's what's happening. Okay, so Philip Newell. Let me say, first of all, in regards to the two of you and your relationship. Meg, I was listening to a recent podcast, you with Tammy Simon. And I think it's in there or somewhere that that you wrote that you said Carolyn loves my work and I adore her work. And I just think love and adore the two of you. It's time, and I get to be the person to do this.
You're the matchmaker, Doug.
I am so grateful. So let's hear from Philip for a moment. The Reverend Dr. John Philip Newell is considered the foremost authority on Celtic spirituality alive today, and has been described as a wandering teacher with, in quote, the heart of a Celtic bard and the mind of a Celtic scholar. About 10 years ago, a spiritual director that I was working with handed me the book called Celtic Benediction, which is a morning and evening prayer for the 7 days of the week, written by Philip Newell. And I want to read an excerpt from that. He takes the 7 days, and each day has a title, if you will, or a theme. And this is from Monday, The Wildness of Creativity. And this is a little excerpt from that. It's in the prayer of thanksgiving and intercession that he writes. Grant me the grace to reclaim these depths, to uncover this treasure, to liberate these longings, and in being set free in my own spirit, to act for the well-being of the world. And I love those phrases, grant me the grace, uncover this treasure, liberate these longings, set me free in my own spirit, to act for the well-being of the world. And that's to me where the real energy is, because without that phrase, I think you would just hit a dead end. But it's in service of, and I know both of you talk a lot about being in service of. So I thought that was very applicable to our time. And then I want to say one other thing about him. He says, end quote, I'm a son of the Christian household. A couple of years ago, I relinquished my ordination as a minister of the Church of Scotland because I realized there was virtually no connection between what I was teaching and writing and what I signed up for as a young minister in my 20s. No connection between my teachings and the historical creeds and confessions of Western Christianity. Alongside of that shift in movement for him, I think it speaks to whoever we were in our 20s. We can see the seedlings of who we are now, but sometimes it requires letting go of something. And here he literally just relinquished his ordination to get free or freer. And then I thought the two of you would love this excerpt from a recent interview. He says, so much of the leadership of our Western world, especially, has been under a type of shadow masculine energy that has arrayed itself up over against earth, but also over against the feminine. I think the Celtic tradition very beautifully holds together this reverence for the feminine and the reverence for earth. And I think we can clearly talk about the Western world and where all of that is. What do we want to drop into in regards to what's most recent, like today on the front page of the New York Times, or as we jump on Facebook or whatever? Can we just dive into that for a moment to contextualize our conversation? I'll let the two of you just take it.
Go ahead, Meg.
All right. We have never been here before. We have never experienced the death of our nation. We have never experienced this level of insanity that I now see as purely demonic, in that it is destroying everything it can with no care at all for people, for humanity, for the planet, for the future. It is demonic. That's a definition of evil. I could talk about my own sense that there are truly demons at work at this point. And for me, the question is, who are my role models now? And because I have very powerful role models for extreme loss of one's nation with Tibetan teachers and South African colleagues who were part of the struggle. I've been reaching for them for years, and now they're my only role models. Like, what does it mean when you see that everything you have treasured is ending? So I'm in this question of how to support my students at this point, as well as how to support myself.
Yes.
I'm better at that, though. You know?
I couldn't have said it more clearly. And I'm also in a place, how do I support myself? How do I support my clients? I'm in a doctoral program in coaching and leadership right now. And that is not only feeding my soul, but it's just equipping me to be more present than I've ever been. I'm glad that I have these resources within me that are allowing me to be as present as I am now with folks who are terrified, which doesn't mean to. I think Meg and I both live partly on Social Security, and we don't know where that's coming from next, because we've got this person who's not even an American citizen and certainly not an elected official in charge of the checkbook of the United States. And it's absolutely terrifying. And it is demonic, absolutely. I certainly have never lived in a time of such evil. I didn't live in Germany in the 1930s, but that's what's echoing at the moment. Um, and so here we are. And how do we move forward? I was reading this little book this morning.
Yes.
Called
I've been reading it again also.
Have you? Yeah. Called Perseverance. And on page 15, there's this little section called Dwelling in Uncertainty. And since this book came out and I got it in 2010, I have gone back to this page innumerable times. And this is so hard for our culture to get. I mean, it's like when you say this, sometimes it just goes right over people's heads. Rather than thinking one perspective is preferable to the other, let's notice that both are somewhat dangerous. Either position, optimism or pessimism, keeps us from fully engaging with the complexity of this time. If we see only troubles or only opportunities, in both cases, we are blinded by our need for certainty, our need to know what's going on, to figure things out so we can be useful. And you say at the end of this page, the challenge is to refuse to categorize ourselves. We don't have to take sides or define ourselves as either optimists or pessimists. Much better to dwell in uncertainty, hold the paradoxes, live in the complexities and contradictions without needing them to resolve. And boy, is that difficult to do. I remember several years ago when Terry Patton was interviewing you, Meg, the late Terry Patton, and he was pretty adamant at the beginning about, well, there's this great opportunity for spiritual change and, this consciousness revolution. And you didn't say it exactly as I'm going to say it, but you said no. And went on to explain why. I'd love to hear you say more about that now.
Absolutely. Well, I have written more recently, a few years ago, about this critique that I always got that, well, you're too negative. You're preventing a positive future because you're so negative. And I would just say, I'm sorry, I'm a realist. I'm a historian. I'm bringing forward the past to our present so we can see it more clearly. And then I just one day, I just had enough of all of this. And so I created this little moment, which is, here's the proverbial glass, right? Is it half empty or half full? There's only one right answer, which is, well, it's half full and there's lots of possibilities and all of that nonsense. And what I became clear about was, no, oh my gosh, there's water here. Who needs it? And how am I going to get it to them? And this is the basis of my work now, in developing people to discover what is your meaningful contribution now, not from the past, not from whatever purpose statements and collages and beautiful clarifications of who you want to be. But if you really take in this time, your reality and the needs of the people, the communities, the causes around you, if you take that in, then you get clear what's needed. Am I the person to make that contribution? And then you do that work. So this noticing, oh my gosh, there's water. Well, who needs it? Who needs me? Who needs my skills, my gifts? And then figure out how to offer it. So it's not about what you think about the future, because we get so entangled. And you wrote in Undaunted, a whole chapter on hope, quoting me in part because I keep writing about this. But I think I've recently, and we're just going to see in the next few weeks what people who are hopeful, how they experience what's happening. But it was Hannah Arendt, who I'm now reading again, who said that we use hope to leap over the present moment. So it's another form of denial, and it sets us up for depression, cynicism, when our hopes turn very quickly because they're not realized. They're blinders, but they're not realized. When we see that we have failed, then we go to the other side of hope, which is fear. And this is the deep Asian spiritual understanding that hope and fear are two sides of the same coin. Now, what we're seeing right now is people in their fear can't just sit with it, but instantly have to figure out, well, what am I going to do? How do we contribute to, again, leaping over the present moment? So I've worked with people in my warrior community who are DEI consultants. They're totally out of work. They instantly want to host conversations about how we keep equity and justice and diversity alive. And I've just said it's too soon. We do not know the landscape that we're walking in right now, but that is a normal human response. I see the issue. I'm devastated. I'm fearful. Let me just plan something for the future. And the future is so, I would say, known, but for most people, it's not yet in our awareness that we are truly in collapse. I mean, you spoke about Social Security, but right now, by tomorrow, they want 2 million federal workers to resign. Federal government gone. FBI, CIA, gone. America is at its most vulnerable state right now for terrorist attacks, cyber attacks, because we've just lost the expertise. We've lost all this expertise in how to run an agency, how to do everything. And so we're moving into a state of anarchy very, very soon.
Meg, I think it might be helpful if we talk about what collapse means. I know that I've been using the word for 15 years, and
Yeah.
a lot of people don't really know what that means.
Can you
And
give your definition,
yeah,
please?
I'd really like to hear you speak more about that, and I'll give mine.
Okay. Well, I've written 2 versions of Who Do We Choose to Be, in tracing where we are against the very well defined pattern of collapse. So, one understanding, it is the collapse of the institutions and systems that have been created to support our lives, and our whole lifestyles are based on systems. That's why they want to get rid of the government, because it's, for whatever reason, I don't know. But these systems can simply implode from their own weight. We're seeing that now. These vast bureaucracies overdone with regulations and policies and the need to control or live by the letter of the law. We all come up against that if we're trying to do anything with a government agency. And this is why I guess it just needs to be abolished, because it doesn't work. Well, when it doesn't work, then you lose the very reasons those systems were created: environmental protection, food and water, healthiness, safety nets, support. All of that is about to disappear. That's one aspect of collapse. Well, what will also disappear are the systems of education. That's already been targeted. Banking. And when people say, well, these systems need to go, I just instantly ask them now, have you ever lived in a country in collapse? I've worked in Zimbabwe. I know what that was like. Just look at Venezuela and you'll see how, I don't know, a third of the population has already fled. Because nothing works. Okay, nothing works. Now, the other pattern of collapse that I have relied on in my own writings is that of Sir John Glubb, because he traced who we are in different stages. So it's very sociological, but it's also very human. And it's so easy to track it against what's happening here. So you start with high ideals, with invader groups, tribes that invade and create a lot of destruction. So that's that's the start of a new culture, new civilization. It's a time of the highest ideals, the most sacrifice of self. In the second phase, he has 6 phases. In the second phase, the invaders actually learn from who they've just invaded. So they take over more sophisticated systems, weaponry, and ways to win. And then by the third phase, and these are generational for Glubb, so they're about 20, 25 years. The third phase is when things settle down and business takes over. Whatever the culture, whatever the time period, you could see this in the Silk Road cultures. You could see this in the South American cultures. This is independent of how the culture expresses itself. This is just, for me, it was so powerful because it tracks human behavior from idealism to a richness of life. And then that leads to takeovers by leaders who want to give people everything they ask for, the age of entitlement, the focus on material goods and wealth. This is in every culture, the loss of any common ground, any common values. And the final stage, which we are quickly approaching the end of, is the age of distraction, the age of entertainment, the age of entitlement. It's pure narcissism. It's pure demands on leaders and then throwing them out when they don't make our lives better, which we see everywhere. It's a movement to the right as people keep demanding more and more and getting less and less. But I think the most overwhelming part of the pattern that struck me was in the final stage, the culture, whatever it is, worships not deities, but musicians, actors, and sports heroes. I rest my case. And the older people decry the loss of the over sexualization of the culture of the youth by these entertainers. And you only have to look at the recent Grammy outfits to find out. Yeah. So this is where we are. And my whole work is, yes, it's scary, but once you see where we are, then you can define meaningful contribution. So it's not a time for creativity. It's not a time for thinking we're going to create alternative futures that will work. No, we have to go through this. So I want to hear your definition, Carolyn, please.
I don't know that I have a real succinct definition. Certainly don't have the layout that has, which I absolutely love. But it's really a time which I write about this, talk about this. I see it as an invitation from the sacred self within us and in the universe to sit with, as you wrote about, and allow that sitting with to transform us, whether that looks like um, dealing with our wounds, dealing with our lack of compassion, deciding, letting that take us to a new way of living and a new way of service. And people, I'm finding, need really a lot of support for doing that because it's so foreign to our culture. Is how do we be with this and let it teach us what we need to learn and what we need to do?
They're two different, absolutely interconnected, but at different levels of view, I would say. So where you're, I think, focused on how do we, understand and explore our true nature. I'm dealing with both the psychological, sociological, and spiritual dimensions of how do you respond when your whole culture
So,
is collapsing
yeah,
around you?
because you can't do the inner work without being compelled to do the outer work that's calling you. Absolutely.
That's what we hope for. And I certainly think that right now, where we both started with defining this time, I feel a great responsibility to know for myself as a teacher how to lead my students forward into this now truly terrifying reality.
Absolutely. That's what I'm doing as well.
Yes, and it's very challenging, isn't it?
Oh, man.
Yeah,
Yeah. And self-care for us is really important.
essential.
Certainly. And 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 connection with other people is extremely important right now. To be with my allies and see what they need, and then let them see what I need, is just because we're not going to get through this alone. Are you kidding me? Just not going to happen.
Exactly.
And this is a form of community right here, right? I mean,
Yes,
there's so many different
I
avenues.
want to refute that.
Okay.
This is a form of consolation and connection.
Okay.
But what we need in terms of commitment to each other is yet to be discovered by us. I mean, I'm now, in my most recent book, Restoring Sanity, I speak about creating islands of sanity. But that requires a whole new level of commitment to community, which we don't have a lot of examples of, but it's my great experiment. Like, okay, now that you know where we are, will you now make truly the self sacrifice of personal needs to come together and figure out how we're going to stay together? Because there's no other answer. That's the slogan of Berkana Institute, my institute, that whatever the problem, community is the answer. But that takes a lot of changes in us, from personal self protection, which is our only response when we're in fear and in the primal reptilian brain, to how to be a fully conscious human, willing to give up my own demands and needs to create and preserve community. That's I think the huge task of our time.
I appreciate you saying that, Meg. So, is a clear, more accurate way to talk about that this is educational and this is a runway or a portal of entry to,
Could be,
it could be.
could be.
But I think what's coming to my mind is at the end of the runway, let's say as we get educated, as we're doing, I'm learning, that somewhere there's going to be an invitation. Maybe it's explicit, maybe it's not. Maybe we have to some ways kind of create our invitation into meeting with people meeting with a group of people, and being a self in the midst of other growing
Yeah.
selves. But that's actually a commitment. And so I appreciate you helping me get clear on that, because
Yes,
it would
but
be
you're creating the first connection.
right. It's like a port of
You don't have to create communities. This is your work to gather the people together so we find each other. But for me, then you have to go local at this point.
that's what I was
So
just going
you
to.
can, yes, we're educating, we're inspiring, and I use the word summoning now because that's really where I am. Like,
Yeah.
you have to do this now.
Yeah. I,
Um,
I would like to add, Meg, that
Appreciate that.
here in Boulder, about 2 years ago, I got an email from people I mostly didn't know, um, saying, in these times that are so dire and the possibility of, wildfires in Boulder as a result of climate change and blah, 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 we're creating this group. And for right now, we're just calling it the End of the World Group. And we can change the name later, but if you're interested, come out and join us. So it started a group that I've been part of for about 2 years, twice a month, and we gather on a Sunday afternoon, and we have three purposes in this group. One is to support each other in any kind of trauma that happens to our community. Secondly, emotional and spiritual development. And thirdly, some kind of project that we do openly for the community that brings attention to what we're doing and possibly adds more people. And then this last Sunday, we had a member of the community who said, "Look, I know all these people in Boulder government, and other leaders in the community that I'd like to start a second group on the alternate Sunday to just help these people who are very scared right now and they don't know where to go and they don't know how to lead." So this has been for me a most amazing experience to be part of this group. And going forward, we are going to need each other like we never have before. And I'm so thrilled that we can do something to guide this community. At the same time, I'm really aware that Boulder's a target. It will become a target because we're one of the bluest countries in the country. And,
but your saving grace is you have Google there now, right?
yeah, and Amazon.
That may be your free card, free pass.
Maybe,
some
who knows?
some level of protection.
Yeah.
Carolyn, anything more
But
on that?
I just want to say yes,
Please.
yes, yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
And some of those folks know you, Meg, and I'm not going to mention names.
It's
Yes.
a beautiful model.
That is a
And
beautiful
that's what we
model, and
need to
that's
do.
local.
Just start a conversation
Yes.
in your local community. And the first part of the conversation is yes, we're scared shitless, but we're together.
Yes.
And that's all we need to start to feel we have some choices here. We have some work to do that can be meaningful, as you're just discovering with the government. I mean, it's wonderful, but it's just the courage to start calling your neighbors together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something that I think both of you were really connecting on, and that is when we're alone, be it we wake up in the morning or we go to bed in the evening, and we have a time of meditation, prayer, it's just us. And we're sitting in this place that you're inviting us to. And many of the people listening to this are trying to sit in that place of both and trying to sit in that place of the discomfort of what is as opposed to what it should be, but just sitting with that. Let's talk about that for a moment, because you used a phrase, Meg, in your interview with Tammy Simon, cleansing one's filters. And I want to talk about that because people are talking to me and I'm talking to my friends about when I'm sitting with me and I'm listening and I'm dealing with reality. It's hard to trust, especially when your early trauma stuff shows up. And if you're an IFS subscriber, the different parts of you are showing up, and it can create confusion in that space. I'm all for gathering with people, but I think I'm thinking as a psychotherapist, that's the way I think, is what's happening within that human being. So let's talk about for a moment, what does it mean to cleanse one's filter so that you can, and maybe we can express it a different way than just that, so that you can really hear. You can really hear not only what's going on inside, but you hear the outside invitation. You talked, Meg, about grace dropping in. The grace drops in and it calls you to
I think
something.
that's Carolyn's view of grace. It's not mine.
Okay, but you spoke with Tammy Simon about you. You talked about grace.
Well, I will definitely talk about grace.
Okay, well, let's talk about grace, but let's
I,
talk about
I
also.
want to talk about what you formulated there as the uh, what we come up against when we're in trying to be quiet with our minds. And so I am so Buddhist at this point that I know the power of meditation. And if you can't do it alone, do it with a group. There are so many beautiful offerings at this point. Banyan with Tara Brach and daily meditations, because you have to learn how to take charge of your mind. And that means not becoming a blank mind with no thoughts, because the function of the mind is to create thoughts. The function of the heart is to pump blood. And thinking that we just can't do meditation because I can't clear my head of thoughts, it's just the greatest impediment for people. But you need to learn this with a loving community. When you're dealing with past trauma, there are many, many offerings to deal with that. But this is where I get very hardcore. The only reason I believe we need to go back in time is so we can go forward in service. And this is about not so much clearing the filters, because that speaks to our biases, our judgments, how we see the world. We want to see it clearly so we can discern what is wise action here. How can I contribute? So that's in the whole arena. The filters is another word for all our past conditionings, habits of seeing, how our perceptions barely pick up any information. But if your experience of the past is overwhelming you, then yes, get with any of these groups or programs to clear the trauma. But the purpose of that is not to make you healthier, it's to make you more capable of contributing to this time. And you see it so clearly when people have experienced terrible losses and then they create a nonprofit so other people won't experience that. Um, that's the path for me. We take our suffering and trauma and organize into some resource for other people. So we go from this tight view of, of poor me and victim me to how can I use my suffering to eliminate other people's suffering? That for me is the path, total path.
I couldn't agree more. And, all of the inner work that people have ever done with me has resulted in them eventually saying, how can I help? What can I do? How can I alleviate suffering? Absolutely.
And it's so healing, right?
Absolutely.
So healing.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
You
meaning
bet.
of life for me, the
Yeah.
purpose of life.
Absolutely.
Greatly. What did you learn?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then how do you make good use of your learning
You
on
betcha.
behalf of other people? Yeah. We're getting very confused at this point in our culture by people who do the trauma work to relieve their personal pain. Yes. but then don't take it forward.
Shift.
Contribution. And, we're getting really sucked into more and more focus on our individual psyches.
So imagine you woke up this morning and there was an envelope wherever you had your morning tea or coffee. It had your name on it. And let's say you didn't get freaked out by who in the world put this on my table and who was in my house last night. And you open the envelope and it's got one word on it and it says grace. What does grace mean to the two of you?
I didn't need that in an envelope, by the way.
That's fine. I like to set it up that way.
Actually, the way my life works with guides and guardians is I could easily find an envelope, but
Cool.
and not be shocked. But grace, my teacher Sadhguruji says that grace is the fabric of the universe. It's always available, and you just have to open to it. This is my direct experience that the more we open, the more we ask and tune in. It can be prayer as a form of that, but just opening, not demanding. Then all sorts of grace filled things happen. I'm right now focusing people on synchronicities. What just happened that had to be orchestrated from somewhere beyond you? Okay. And then I worked with so many Catholic sisters who said, it's all grace. And I also love that perspective of seeing the sacred in everything that happens. But that takes some work these days.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Sure does. I couldn't add to that, Meg. It's just, it's something you can't work for, something you can't deserve.
Right.
Because none of us does.
Well, I think we all do.
It's not something we can make ourselves worthy of.
We don't have to. That's where I'm going to express this. I do have a beautiful quote from Annie Lamott.
Please.
Which is, I do not understand the mystery of grace, only that it meets us where we are and does not leave us where it found us. But you just raised a really theological issue for me, so I want to both name it and talk about it, which is, how do we hold ourselves in this world, in this universe? Do we believe we have to earn things, deserve things, that it's a need? I mean, this is the Abrahamic faiths that I'm particularly, I'm Jewish, raised Christian, mystic Christian, Buddhist. We all know that the greatest crime is this perpetuation of believing that we are not enough, that we are not good enough, that we are not worthy. One of the things that I have benefited from and now feel so clear about in Asian faiths, but also with Matthew Fox's work on original blessing, we are innately, at our very core of being, we are awake. We are loving and compassionate. So the practices in Asian faith traditions are to clear away all the garbage, all the preconceptions, all the armoring, because we're already who we want to become. And that for me is a huge difference, fundamental difference as I read Christian thinkers or work with quite a few of them. Where are we starting? Are we starting with original blessing or original sin?
Right on. Yeah.
And it's just this, one of the things we've exported so terribly in American culture is you're not good enough. You're a born failure. Now you got to work your way out of it. And that creates all this heartbreak and suicide even of people who just really bought into it. And then when we say easily, no, love is the answer. Yes, it is. Feeling loved is the answer. Feeling I belong is the solution. But where does that love originate? Is it within me? Do I experience it cosmically from other sources? And how am I taking my place in this world? This is where I'm just showering you with a lot of topics here. But how do we participate in this world with other beings, with grace, with beauty? And this is where all the indigenous learnings are so powerful for us. Yeah. So we've really messed it up greatly. And now we're reaping the consequences and people retreating into fear and surrendering their humanity. It is just horrible to watch.
I can imagine people listening into this. And I'll be honest to say, I'm asking this also for myself and for my family. What do we do with the hatred that we feel towards the administration, towards individuals? You spoke of the demonic earlier, and I think I'm a systems thinker, and so I think of the system. But certain days I think of an individual, and I feel hatred. And then when I drop into what you were speaking of, Meg, because it's not a new concept for me, and that is, do we start with original blessing? And so that's where I start, and that's been a process for me. So I then apply that to the person I'm hating, and somehow it creates this confusion because there's something inside of me that just wants the clarity of, not that it feels good to hate, but it feels important to acknowledge it. But then do I do in some way, and I know that there's no simple answers to this, but how do we
I
hold that?
actually have a simple practice.
Okay, but I will say one of the things I've
But
so appreciated by my dear friend Walter Brueggemann, the Old Testament scholar. Walter's a personal friend of mine, and if you read Walter's work on Psalms, and he's written 60, 70 books. And I think, Walter, if you're listening, he's probably not, but if we chat about it, I'll say I said this, and he might say, well, Doug, you spoke for me. But I think he would say my work on the Psalms is the most important work that I've done. And he's not the first to come across this. But the Psalms are divided into three categories. You have protest psalms, you have praise psalms, and you have lament
can we stay with
psalms.
hatred?
Yeah, but all I want to
Yeah.
say is I want to get to that. But the protest psalms are truly full of hatred.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so what I want to ask, when we wake up in the morning, we're already feeling it, or we read the front page of the paper or read it online, what do we do? What do you do?
Yes.
And what do you do with your hatred? And is it actually not only real and cathartic to feel, but does it provide energy? How do we shift that to
Yeah.
work for
Well,
good?
it's certainly red hot, fiery energy. So is rage. Any form of anger is just this huge cauldron of energy. Now, anything we do without transforming that energy into insight and seeing clearly, if we're just acting from anger, we will create more violence. That's so well known.
We know that.
Violence begets violence. Only love transforms violence. Dalai Lama I've quoted him many times on that beautiful teaching. We all know it's true at one level. But anger, rage, powerlessness are valid human emotions, reactions to our situation. Here's the practice. I'm sure, Carolyn, you're familiar with this. Is called Tonglen, giving and receiving, but it's transformative. So I want to offer it quickly. I experience rage so frequently and so overpoweringly, and I have visions of just killing people, who I just think shouldn't be here or should be taken out. When I experience that level of rage, this takes some practice. I have learned to ask, I wonder how many other people on the planet right now, just like me, are experiencing this emotion. Just like me. Are there 1 million? Are there 100 million? Are there people I know who are experiencing this level of rage? And once you ask that question and tune into this, you shift from being victimized by your own strong emotion to recognize, oh, this is part of the human experience. Once you're connected to the human experience of rage or powerlessness, then it dissipates the intensity of our own rage. And it's a means to connect with all these people who are on the streets, who are shooting up people in different places, who are burning police cars, who are screaming at cameras, come help us. And then I connect with them, and then I can offer my compassion. I understand you, but I don't have to go out on the street because I have a practice to transform this so I can see you more clearly and extend compassion to you. That's for those emotions. For the people that I condemn and label quite deliberately and intentionally as evil, I don't let them into my energy. I don't want to feel compassion for them. I want to feel clarity about how do I stop you?
Interesting.
Okay? I think compassion
Hmm.
needs to be expressed for the people who are suffering, not the causes of the suffering. I've had a lot of conversations about this with Pema Chodron, but I'm quite convinced that I'm not letting your energy into me.
I appreciate that because sometimes somebody will say, and I was ready for you to say, I'm not going to let your energy into me, meaning I'm not going to let you um, ignite in me the rage. I really appreciate it shifted me for a moment to go, wow, this compassion that some are saying, no, you need to call that up. And I'm like, there's something about it. That's going to help a lot of folks. Carolyn, your thoughts on that? And then I'm conscious of time. And then I have one other question that'll see us through all the way to the end.
Okay.
Meg, I want to thank you for that beautiful practice. It really shifts the perspective. And, I'm totally with you. I'm not one of those people who, says, well, get quiet and close your eyes and, take this person this hateful, evil person, take them into your heart and love them. No, oh, and no, you're not getting into my heart. Um, and it's just a whole different way of looking at it. And I really want to thank you for that.
That was a very important. I mean, the whole conversation today has been like sitting at a table, but that was a real important shift.
I have this practice as a video on my website, and we can send you the link to it. Yeah.
Another thing I want to recommend
Carolyn.
about Meg's work is she published this Warrior songbook, and there's a link.
It's a song.
Song line, and there's a specific link for that page. And I was just the second sample on that page of the Warrior song line. Highly, highly recommend it. It just gave me chills. Love it.
Still gives me chills. It's an altering, mind altering.
Yes, it is.
Experience with the music of my dear, now gone partner, Jerry Granelli. Yeah. We can send you these links, Doug, if.
Yes.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Okay.
Richard Rohr says the way we do anything is the way we do everything. And I think at some point that falls apart. But I think you got to hold that for a while and go, damn, that's pretty true. So I try to squeeze so much in. I'm learning to not do
Don't
that.
apologize. I think you're doing well with us.
That's great. That's great. But I got 1,000 things I could squeeze in. But I want to drop back to in a recent podcast with Tammy Simon, the two of you had an interesting moment because the two of you were talking about being in service to others. It was kind of in that time period of the podcast conversation. And she said, I experience at times this overwhelming flood of just waking up to the moment of what I'm feeling and feeling this impulse to do this or that. I was prepared for you to respond with, and it probably was more about my projection clearly into it. It's like, those are the times, because I grew up being really criticized for being impulsive. And so I was prepared. This is the way we project in, right? I was prepared for you to say, yeah, you got to kind of calm that down and kind of listen in. Not that we don't have to do that, but you said, you know what? Those are the moments we need to listen to. We need to listen to what just shifted in us. And many times that's the space where we're seeing clear. Our filters are cleansed, and we're to do something in service to others. It was a beautiful moment.
Mm.
Would you talk about maybe each of you, if it fits, where you've had that moment recently, or maybe you're living off of an experience 2 years ago, and it's just like you had this clarity, not just for the day, but for like a calling or a repositioning, kind of like Philip Newell. All of a sudden, he says, "Man, I'm going to let go of this ordination thing. I'm shifting to a new place." What's shifting for the two of you, and has something happened recently in that space that people can listen in and go, well, if it happens to them, it's probably happening to me as well, but I need to be attuned to it. I need to listen.
I'm going
Anyways,
to let you start, Carolyn.
go for it, Carolyn.
One of the things that's shifting in me in this program that I'm in right now and training is it's challenging a lot of beliefs about connection and my traumatic experiences in the past with the, being kind of raised in the Spanish Inquisition by my parents. And it was always what do you think about this? And which Bible verses did you memorize today? And blah, 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 which caused me to shut down in lots of ways. And I'm finding myself now really opening up so much more. And it's just feeding my soul. And then that is just compelling me to go forth in service in my life. And so, I'm kind of my little laboratory for this at the moment.
That's
And,
just
and,
how it should be.
and I'm just loving it,
Mm.
and that's going on in the midst of this horror that is all around us.
And it's also going on because of the work you're doing now with students in this program?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. How wonderful. That what a gift to you.
What a
Yes,
beautiful
it
thing.
is.
Yeah.
Meg.
Well, I live in that space now. I teach it. I know it's available to all of us, but it does take practice. It does take, what Tammy Simon was speaking about, and I don't recall that section, was about these spontaneous insights.
That's correct.
Which is wonderful. And those are gifts. That's grace right there. It's another definition of grace. Suddenly you see something. Suddenly you're directed in a different way. And the first work is learning to trust those moments when you are gifted with an insight or clarification or a message. Recognize it, honor it, and say thank you. And the more we recognize these moments and say thank you, more and more insights, more guidance, more deep knowing moments of recognition will be available to all of us. And this is now a very big theme in my work, because once you're in that connection with spirit, however you name it, it's beyond this material realm. You will be grace-filled moment by moment by moment. And in little incidents, I'll tell you a hilarious one. I was trying to mail a package the other day that had to get to a New York City hotel for someone who works in Romania and Ukraine. And it had to be there by tonight. I first went to UPS. It was going to cost me $130.
Yes.
So I'm thinking, well, I'm going to go try to post office. I'm expecting to pay a large amount of money, but not $130. And as I'm driving to the post office, I get told, go to FedEx. I think, oh, all right. And then to confirm the message, a FedEx truck drives right in front of me, crosses the road, right? I don't know how he was redirected for that moment, but I go to FedEx, and because they've changed their rates, I mail Rachel the books for $15. others. And that's listening to guidance and then also looking for funny signs that confirm, yes, you did hear us correctly. Go to FedEx.
Beautiful.
But that's available to us all the time. And so often, I mean, when I had a Christian spiritual director and I was questioning some things, she said, the Holy Spirit speaks to us as loudly as we are willing to listen. Okay. Spirit is always speaking to us in whatever form you want to put that in. Guardian angels, guides, protectors.
Yeah, those are just our forms, aren't they? We just
those are our names for the same process. And then my Buddhist teacher, Chogyam Trungpa, said, nobody's listening to me. But this is when he had passed on and he was speaking very clearly to one woman who was writing it all down. And other people said, well, why aren't you speaking to me from consciousness? And he just said, well, you're not listening. So this is our role right now. As lost as we are when we're fearful, why don't you just try quieting for a moment and just feeling the presence? We're really not alone at this time.
Meg, you sent me an email a day or so ago when I asked Kelly, your assistant, and by the way, she's awesome. So please give my best to her. She's been so swift and so helpful. So thank you, Kelly, with an I. You wrote to me, which I really appreciated, and you said there's something that I do want to talk to Carolyn about. And I'm going to read it, but I think we've already covered it.
Yes, I would like to do a summation of that question as a way of
thank you.
closing.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. You wrote this. We, and you're referring to the two of you, we've devoted our lives to trying to wake people up, to change in our readers' minds to new ways of understanding and relating to what's happening. Where are we now with using our voices to raise awareness or to change behaviors or to what? Question mark.
Yes.
So
I loved asking myself that question. But it's, what both of us have expressed and demonstrated is who we're serving now, whether it's clients or students or both. What do we feel they need from us? Does that feel like a valid question, Carolyn?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I've stopped, years ago, I stopped trying to wake people up. My book, Undaunted, is probably the last one I will write on collapse because I'm serving more now, and really wanting to support people who already have awakened, and they want to clear the decks of their own trauma and history and all of the obstacles that keep them from living their full potential and serving the planet. So I'm happy to be in that place in my life. Never thought at this time of my life I'd be doing this and feel so fulfilled, but here I am. Here you are, Meg.
Yes.
And what you're doing, Doug, we're so blessed.
We're so thank you. Thank you. It's just what a gift.
Yes.
The way I stumbled into this, and I think as I look at my journey, those have been the greatest gifts where I plan and I maneuver and I manipulate and whatever I do, and sometimes for good and not, but then I stumble into something and I just go, wow, just a gift given.
So let's call this stumbling grace.
Let's do.
I love it.
Please, because it is.
We just stumble into it. Meg, would you take us out with the story of the faithful nuns and the evil bishops?
Oh, yes.
Would you take us out with that story?
I would love to. And I would just say that my own path corresponds very much to Carolyn's, where I am now focused on those who already see the future, the present moment, and want to serve. So that's
where you
entry into anything I'm offering is you have to be focused on how can I serve this time. And it's very rewarding work. And I plan to die in the saddle doing this, clearly. So the story of the nuns that is so instructive, I'm really glad you asked for it, was in 2008 or 9, the Vatican decided to attack women, Catholic nuns in the US. And this was created by the bishop, the cardinal from Boston, Cardinal Law, who was rife with pedophile scandals. They had to sell the Holy House in Boston to cover their settlements. And he went to the Vatican for protection and started whispering, you really should look at the nuns because they're speaking about, universal consciousness, the universal Christ. They're not against necessarily women's rights, including abortion. And they're just off. They're not leading a solid Catholic Orthodox life. And of course, that is always the deflect attention from yourself and blame someone else. So the Vatican started this series of investigations that had two different parts to it. One, they visited each of the chapter houses where Catholic sisters lived in their different orders. And they actually found nothing wrong with them. But then they also went after the Leadership Council of Women Religious, LCWR, where all the leaders, 1,200 leaders at the time, of Catholic sisters met, had an annual conference. I spoke at one of them, and I worked intensely with their core leadership group. So I heard this story. It was an inquisition. There was no doubt about it. I mean, some priests would say it's just a bunch of lesbian nuns, and the Vatican really, under the preceding Pope, Ratzinger, was out to get them. It was so misogynist at its core. And we joke, if they could burn you at the stake, they would do that. Yes, they would have. So instead, they put them through what was to be a 5-year process. And it ended after 3 years with the ascension of Pope Benedict and him finally being made fully aware of this persecution. And then the sisters, they behaved beautifully throughout. You can read all about this and Who Do We Choose to Be. But the practice that I learned from them was that at one point they were in the Vatican and they had just been told of certain things happening, not the worst things were yet to come. And they were just overwhelmed with incredulity and shock, and you're really going to do this? And so they're packing up, and the evil cardinal comes over, kind of leers down at them and says, "You are not afraid, are you?" To which the sisters exchanged glances quickly, and then one spoke and said, "We are faithful, therefore we are not afraid." And that's become my practice. Whenever I'm in real fear, I think I have to start teaching this more now because we're in real fear. The question is, have I been faithful? And you have to know what you're faithful to. Now, my work is focused on being faithful to the human spirit, to human beings, to people who are suffering. So when I know that I'm doing the best I can to enact my faith in people, then my fear dissipates. I still have great fear for the future. But in the present moment, I know my work is serving my faithfulness.
What a story.
Isn't it?
What a story.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Thank
I'm
you,
so
Meg.
glad you asked, Doug.
Good. Of course, I grew up in a tradition where, and I feel like I need to kind of clarify what I mean by this, but I grew up in a tradition where often people would say, "I'll pray for you. I'll pray for you in this. I'll pray for your protection and whatever." And I don't know. This is what's coming to me, and I'll end with it. And that is, imagine the three of us are in a church service in Martin Luther King's church, and we know this took place. They're praying for the protection for Martin. And so we see the outcome. And
Mhm.
some would say, well, the prayer wasn't answered. Well, what does protection mean? And I think we'll leave it with that. And so I pray for you, Meg, and protection for you. And I
Thank you.
pray for you, Carolyn, and protection for you. You're truly sages at this time in your life. And we know, I've known a lot of elderly people, or let's say in the fourth quarter, the second half of life. And it's sad because they don't show up with sage content. They don't show up with that to lead on the way out, to lead. And so I just want to thank you. I feel honored to be at the table with the two of you. I can't wait for this to be shared. My filmmaker son yesterday, I was telling Carolyn this, and we'll end with this. He said, don't hesitate to ask Meg and Carolyn to get this out in their community and for the sake of not only for our message and those who we're in service of, but also he said, Dad, we're a small operation and we need assistance. And I'm like, yeah, we do. So I'm committed to 2025 as the doors continue to open. I'm just committed to every episode will be about what's happening in this time and what it means to create an ongoing resistance to it.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
I just want to say thank you. And
I
I'm not
will
going to say,
circulate
oh,
this
thank you, Meg.
widely.
Likewise, I will do
Beautiful.
the same. Yeah,
Beautiful.
absolutely.
You have to understand that you create the means for us to be together,
Yes.
to explore together. And these are messages we want to get out to not only our communities, but others. So it's a beautiful, beautiful practice.
Bless you.
Thank
You,
you,
Meg.
Doug.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Meg.
Carolyn.
Yeah.
Thank you. You bet. I received that, and we will continue on. So I'm not going to say goodbye. I'm just going to say see you later.
See ya.
See ya.
Thank you.